figuring out if the other girls were being friendly to her or not. Not long after starting at secondary school, she'd been given a leaflet with advice about how to cope with bullying. She hadn't yet got around to reading it when an older girl, called Kim, squirted glue in her hair on purpose. Dhikilo had a book in her hands at the time, a big heavy one about history, and she hit the older girl on the forehead with it so hard that Kim fell over backwards and knocked over several of her chums. It was a very bad thing to do, and it could have caused brain damage, as her guidance teacher explained later. And when Dhikilo got home, she read the leaflet about bullying and had to admit that the suggestions in it didn't include knocking your tormentors flat. Anyway, nobody bullied Dhikilo after that. Unless you counted being called Dick and not having as many friends as the average girl at school. She'd done the maths on this. The most popular girls had 13 to 14 pals they hung out with, and the least popular girls had 0, while 7 was the median. She'd learned that word in maths class. Dhikilo had 3. Arithmetically speaking, that put her in the bottom percentile of befriendedness. But that was okay. 3 was plenty to be getting on with. People were so strange, and sometimes you got tired just thinking about them. Lasarnod. The last place Dhikilo lived before being relocated to the south coast of England was a town called Lasarnod, which sounded like a drink on a Middle Eastern restaurant menu that you think you might try, but then you get worried you won't like it and order a Pepsi instead. There was a big dramatic story attached to her and Lasarnod, but it was all quite confused and hazy because she'd been less than a year old at the time, and there were various adults involved who were all unavailable now. Basically, there was a war on, and her parents had split up and she was being carried around by her father, but there was fighting between Somaliland and Puntland, and her father decided she would be better off not going where he was going. So he gave her away, and before she knew it, she was in Corber-on-Sands. When other girls talked about their early life, there were usually loads of details, and the story went on until it grew big enough to fill a book. Her own story was awfully short, she had to admit, and there were quite a few holes in it. She should maybe have kept her eyes open and paid more attention at the time. But she was only a baby then, and babies slept a lot and usually had their eyes closed. Each day, as Dhikilo walked home from school along the promenade, she would see the young mothers trundling their prams, and the babies would be asleep even when the seagulls were screeching and the wind was fierce. They were charging their energy, postponing the day when they had to sit up and deal with stuff. When Dhikilo was 11, just a couple of years ago, her mum told her that her mother was dead. That is, Ruth, her English mum, gave her the news that her original mum had died. Dhikilo had trouble thinking of the right thing to say. "How old was she?" she asked. 31, said her English mum. "It says here." She was holding a piece of official paper with the news printed on it. "That's not very old," said Dhikilo after a long pause. "Was she sick?" Ruth stared at the piece of paper and frowned. "It doesn't say." "What about Dad?" Ruth looked at her indulgently. "You mean your Somaliland dad?" "Yes," said Dhikilo. Her English mum smiled, her face all complicated with knowledge about grown-ups that couldn't be explained. "Still the mystery man, I'm afraid." That was how she often referred to Dhikilo's original father, the mystery man. Nobody seemed to know what had become of him after he'd tossed Dhikilo through the air into the arms of a nurse. By contrast, Dhikilo's English dad was not a mystery man at all. He was in the next room reading a book about a retired politician, with a mug of tea balanced on the arm of the sofa, and his name was Malcolm Bentley, which made his adopted daughter Dhikilo Bentley. Or sometimes, if she was in the mood to write a nice long line at the top of her school jotter, Dhikilo Sahardid Samawada Bentley. What words meant. For a while after getting the news about her mother, Dhikilo tried to learn more about her. At first it seemed that Malcolm and Ruth didn't know anything, and then after a while it seemed there might be some official stuff that Dhikilo could find out, maybe, but not until she was 18. "Why 18?" she asked. because that